What is up guys, it's your boy Solheim here, back with another Cataclysm Classic video. Now, I've been playing a bunch of the Cataclysm beta recently. I've been here for a while, and I've been doing a bunch of testing, both inside dungeons, normal dungeons, heroic dungeons, and target dummies. Based on that, today we're making a tier list for every single class, every single spec, and all the different roles in Cataclysm as well. Based on that, this could turn into a pretty long video, so I'm hoping that you have a base knowledge of the classes in Cataclysm, and if you don't, well, I'll probably break that down further in other videos, but for this one, I'll be going through them quite fast and ranking them as well, because I do believe that what most of you guys came here for is to see where I'm placing your class to get an idea of how good or bad that class will be. Now, I also have a Cataclysm gold making guide that you can check out if you want to make more gold in Cataclysm. I'm not going to go in depth on that, but if you do want to make more gold and support me at the same time, the links will be down below. And if you do get it, then thank you so much, I really do appreciate it. Now, with that being said, before we make this tier list, I think it's important for me to say that this will be based on the entirety of the Cataclysm expansion. Some classes will be way better in phase 1, some will be better in phase 2, some will be better in phase 3, and I'll try to commentate really quickly on that as well as we go through things, but there are a couple of pretty obvious things. Like, for example, mages, warlocks, and boomkins become insane in Firelands when we get access to the legendary staff. Rogues get insane in Dragon Soul when we get access to the legendary daggers, and some of the trinkets we get inside raids as well. They're really huge. Now, when it comes to tier lists, there are many out there, many of them telling you completely different things as well. Some people can tell you that warriors are the top S tier, some people can be like warriors are bad and they're F tier, or B tier, C tier, and D tier. There's so many different tier lists out there telling you completely different things, and all I can say is that this tier list will be my opinion based on the classes, based on my testing on the beta. Once again, I have done a normal dungeon on every single class, I have done a heroic dungeon on almost all classes right now, and I've been testing literally every single class on target dummies as well. So I've been doing the testing that I can. That being said, on the beta, we only have heroic gear, so heroic dungeon gear. We don't have access to the raid gear, we don't have access to pre-abyss and stuff like that, and I've also gone in without gems, without enchants and stuff like that as well, just like the basic gear templates we have access to, some talent points, and some glyphs as well. Now, in addition to that, I've been doing some research on other people's logs and tier lists, just to try to find out a little bit more about things, and just to give you an example of what I mean, we can take a look at, for example, this tier list right here, which will show you that fire mages are S tier, shadow priests are S tier, affliction warlocks are S tier, and survival hunters are S tier. And this is just like one example of a tier list. Then we go over here to pre-raid bis and DPS rankings, telling you arms warriors are S tier, survival hunters are S tier, death knights, frost death knights, marksmanship hunters are S tier on this list, and then going to tier 11, then we have survival hunters, marksmanship hunters, arms warriors, unholy DKs and frost DKs. Tier 12 you have these classes being the top, and tier 13 you have these classes being on top. It is worth noting that marksmanship hunter is top DPS in tier 12 according to this one, and then we have the state of DPS going back to logs from OG Cataclysm. We can see something completely different from this one, so you can see a lot of different classes are ranked way differently from both the overall totals and the adjusted totals, where arcane mages would be top DPS, shadow priest would be number 2, marksmanship hunter would be number 3, affliction warlock number 4, and boomkin number 5, and then fury warrior number 6, and then unholy DK is all the way down towards the bottom. So once again, what I'm trying to show you guys here is that tier lists place classes all over the place. Like over here, marksmanship hunter is at the bottom, while one of the one we just looked at, it was at the top. Meanwhile, unholy DK is number 2 here, while in the other one we just looked at, it's literally at the bottom. Now, in addition to that, we do have some logs as well from various Voldemort servers out there. where you can see exactly how different classes perform. This is once again, this is based on the final patch of Cataclysm. So here we can see which classes are doing top DPS in certain raids. This fight right here is for Ragnaros in Firelands, 25 on a normal mode. And then going down we can see Warriors number 1, Rogue number 2, Warrior number 3, Shadow Priest number 4, Survival Hunter, then we have a Shadow Priest again, Red Paladin, and a bunch of Warriors. So you can see Warriors are really good on that specific boss fight on the final patch of Firelands, or the final patch of Cataclysm. And then we can go into another boss kill. This one is going to be based on Nefarian from Blackwing Descent, heroic 10 man. Over here we can see that Hunter is number 1, Rogue is number 2, Fire Mage is number 3, Elemental Shaman is number 4, and then a Warlock is number 5. And just one more just to show you another example, Ragnaros 10 man. On this one, Red Paladin number 1, Elemental Shaman number 2, Shadow Priest number 3, and Warrior number 4. So based on all of that, now we have gone through some of the logs, some of the different tier lists out there, some of the rankings, just to give you an idea of, first of all, which classes are good, and secondly, how the tier lists are very different from person to person or website to website. Now it's time to start making our own tier list, and you can let me know in the comments down below how wrong I am or which ones you actually agree with as well. Now starting this off, we're gonna go do the Death Knight first. Now I used to play a Death Knight back in Cataclysm. It was not my main back then, I was maining a Resto Druid. I have no reason why, because they weren't really that good, but I started making a Death Knight alt just to be a tank, because none of the other tanks really spoke to me, but the Blooded Death Knight really seemed fun to play. And after leveling on up back in OG Cataclysm and gearing up, I also realized not only is Blood Death Knight fun to play, it is ridiculously strong, mostly due to the new masteries that you get access to for a Blood DK, but it's also just like, you can heal yourself so well. The self-sustainability for a Blood DK is absolutely fantastic, and as a tank, they straight up go into S tier. Whether you're raiding, you're doing dungeon farming, whatever you are doing, Blood DKs are absolutely disgusting. Doing heroics back in the day as well, you were able to skip the need for a healer and just run a Blood DK tank in 4 DPS, assuming everyone knew how to move from the like AoE DPS, and everyone knew how to either avoid damage mechanics or somehow sustain themselves. You could even run with a Shadow Priest and have a Blood DK, because the Blood DK can for the most part heal himself all the way, even in doing heroic dungeons. Now if we get, when we get alpha and beta dungeons in Cataclysm, things might change. You still probably want to have a healer in that case, but they just heal so much, they heal a lot, so Blood DKs are really good both for dungeons and for raids. It also kind of off-puts the demand for example, 2 paladins for tank healing, because a Blood DK can heal himself so much by himself that you can have the healers focusing on healing the entire raid. Now, if you think DKs are only good for tanking, well, think again. There's another DK spec that should be going up into S tier, and that is going to be the Unholy DK. Unholy DKs are absolutely strong throughout the entire expansion, and you will see them absolutely blast on those DPS meters. We saw this happen back in OG Cataclysm, we saw it happen on several Voldemort servers out there, and I can bet you will see it again in Cataclysm Classic as well, especially now with players knowing a lot more about their class, and maybe through dungeons giving better loot through alpha dungeons, beta dungeons, and gamma dungeons, we could get access to certain upgrades we haven't had in the past. So Unholy DKs are looking absolutely juicy as they were before, and they are looking so again. I'm kind of sad to say that, because my favorite DK spec to play when it comes to DPS is Frost. So for me to put Unholy in S tier and then not do the same with Frost, it really hurts, but I'm gonna put Frost into A tier, and Frost is good. It's really good. It's just not Unholy. Unholy is insane, and Frost is good. So Frost is A tier, and it really performs quite well, and it also brings some benefits that the Unholy does not. The same thing happens in Wrath now, like you want to bring 1 Frost DK for the raid-wide buffs they bring. Now that being said, Unholy will still do more DPS, but you probably want to have 1 Frost DK anyway for the raid. Alright, the next class is going to be the Druid, and we're starting this off with Boomkin. Boomkin for me goes to the top of the A tier, even over Frost Death Knight. Now Boomkins are going to be really good in Cataclysm, not only for single target, but also for AoE DPS, for the raid-wide utilities they bring, and also for the innervates they bring, and everything that Boomkins usually bring to the table. Now Boomkins are just getting even better in Cataclysm than they were in Wrath. They're building upon all the core fundamentals that a Boomkin has to deal with, and you do just way more numbers. For me, for example, I was doing a heroic dungeon on my Boomkin, and it took me one or two runs to get into the rotation, but once I did, Boomkins were absolutely popping. Like, first of all, you can top DPS on trash pools, because you have Starfall and then Hurricane, then you also have Wild Mushrooms, that you can also pop for even more AoE DPS, but also on single target, you're absolutely pumping, and I destroyed pretty much everyone on single target DPS, except for a couple of melee people in certain pools. Like, for example, Ret Paladins have a pretty much non-competable burst, because I could not compete against a Ret Paladin on any class when it came to their burst, but for the sustain damage, Boomkin Sustain is really good at DPS. Now, that being said, there's another one that I want to put quite high, and that's going to be Feral. Now, for now, this list is looking like Feral is the top of the A tier, and I'll tell you right now, it's not going to be. It's going to be more like towards the end of the A tier. But personally, I've seen other lists and other comparisons put Feral in both B and C tier, and to me that doesn't make any sense, because when I go back and watch, for example, go back and watch the World First, Paragon kill for Blackwing Descent, I have no idea, but Nefarian, they stacked, was it 10 or 11 Feral Druids? In order to get that kill. Like, Feral Druids are, first of all, they're pumping, they bring Leader of the Pack, which, sure, Warriors bring Rampage, and stuff like that as well, so the Leader of the Pack is not a unique buff. It's other classes can bring similar stuff now, but they bring a lot to the table, and they're really good. And for a Feral, when I was doing DPS on target dummies in Stormwind with a regular heroic gear, Feral DPS was the one class that did the most DPS. Without any cooldown usage, without any glyphs, any enchants, just straight up 346 item level gear, Feral to me was top DPS out of all the specs I played on a target dummy. Now, next up, we still have the Druid class, so we're going through the Tank class, and once again, I'm going to put this into A tier. It is not going to be all the way up here in the A tier, it's going to end up being further down the list, but it's basically the bottom of the A tier. But Feral tanks, or Guardian tanks, whatever you want to call them, it's a pretty juicy tank, and when it comes to tanks in Cataclysm, I would say anything except a Prot Warrior, and you're usually good to go. So Blood DK is absolutely the best if you want to be something else than maybe a Prot Paladin, or even a Feral tank. Now we also have the Healer Druid as well, so Restoration Druid. For this one, I'm gonna go down to B tier, and the reasoning why is that Shamans, for example, you probably want to bring a Shaman now, over a Resto Druid, if you had to choose. Shamans have a Spirit Link Totem, for example, which is really good, and they also get something called Healing Rain, giving them even more AoE healing and raid-wide healing than they had in the past, and they still have Chain Healing, plus they have their totems. On the other hand, this kind of pains me a little bit, because my main in Cataclysm was a Restoration Druid back in the day, and I was doing heroic Firelands raiding as a Resto Druid and having a lot of fun. That being said, I still have the screenshots, and I vividly remember never being top HPS, and never doing top healing, and Paladins, and when we were doing 10 man, they wanted to bring a Paladin and a Shaman, or a Priest and a Shaman. Sometimes a Druid, but usually not really, but Paladins and Priests always had a guaranteed healing spot, and then as a Druid, you are wanted for 25-man raids, for sure, but it's probably the last pick. It depends, maybe over Holy Priest, you would be picked over a Holy Priest. Now next up we have Hunters, and I'm going to start out with the bottom performing Hunter here, which actually would it be? I think, yeah, Beast Mastery. might not be the bottom performing, but I do think it is. So Beast Mastery is going to go down into the C tier. The reasoning for that is quite simply because the other specs overperform, they do better. Now I also am going to put Marksmanship down here, simply because I'm putting Survival up here as well. So when it comes to Marksmanship, you probably can put it up to B tier, and it will probably perform in B tier as well. And once again, referring back to the start of this video, some tier lists have Marksmanship as top DPS. I have no idea where that comes from, but survival DPS like melee or ranged survival hunters and survival hunters in general, they're doing insane DPS. Like, they are at the top of the meters in pretty much every single scenario. Dungeons, raids, every single raid, every raid tier, almost every single raid boss, they are up there competing for the top DPS spots. So survival hunters, when they are this good, I don't see the reason to go anything else. That's just my thought on hunters. So once again, if you're playing a hunter main, let me know your thought on that in the comments down below. Now next up we have the Mage, and to be fair, the Mage is in the same scenario as the Hunter, where one spec vastly overperforms compared to like all the other ones. So Fire Mage would be all the way up into the S tier, for example, while Frost Mage goes down to, even down to D tier, to be fair. C tier, D tier, I'm gonna put it down to D tier. This would be like, don't play. This would be, don't play this spec. And then Arcane over to C tier as well, because once again, Fire is just way better. There's no reason to be anything else. You could make an argument for maybe going something else to get buffs and debuffs stacking, but Fire Mages are just really good. And when I was doing DPS on a target dummy, Fire Mage was absolutely pumping over there as well, without even cleaving. And then when you add cleave boss mechanics into the mix as well, Fire Mages just skyrockets on the DPS meters. Next up is the Paladin, a class that I recently started gearing myself in Wrath, and to be fair, I'm having a lot of fun. Now, I'm playing a Holy Paladin, and Holy Paladins, thankfully, they are insane in Cataclysm as well, just like they were in Wrath. Now, Holy Paladins are going to be, it's basically the same, where a lot of your abilities cost a lot of mana, and also heal a bunch as well, and the difference between a good Paladin and a bad Paladin will really show. So you can go into a dungeon, and you can have a healer paladin, a holy paladin, and you can think, holy, this is a bad healer, and then you think that holy paladins are bad, but then when you see a good holy paladin, you will go into the same dungeon and think, holy paladins are the best healers in the game. It really depends on the individual skill level of that player, and the same thing can be said for every single class, but I do think for a holy paladin, the difference between an okay player, a good player, and a bad player is like night and day on all of those levels, so that's going to be a big difference. And Holy Paladins are really fun to play. You're getting some brand new abilities as well, and they're taking some things away. I don't think we have DSAC. I didn't heal any dungeons, by the way, on the beta, but I don't think we have DSAC in Cataclysm. Divine Sacrifice, but we do have an improved mastery, so like we have the mastery aura, which is doing a little bit more now, like it's just way better of a cooldown. So paladins in general, they're still going to be really good, and you still want to have at least one holy paladin in any single raid. If you're doing a 10-man raid, you still want to have a holy paladin. If you're doing a 25-man raid, you definitely want to have a holy paladin, and even if you're playing a holy paladin, you can also grab DPS off spec and fill a DPS role when necessary. That being said, the healers, like sometimes you bring a healer that can also go DPS. The usual healers that go DPS are Restoration Shamans going over to Elemental Shamans, and Resto Druids going over to Boomkins. Those are usually what you pick, and then the Holy Paladin just stays holy because they bring so much to the table. Now, Retribution Paladins are really good and really fun to play. I love Ret Paladins, and to me they're going to be all the way up there, number 2 on A tier. And when I was doing DPS on a target dummy, for example, on the beta, the burst of a paladin was insane. I was doing 13k DPS, steady DPS on a target dummy, without any enchants, without any like gems, anything, just regular level 85 gear, not even raid gear or anything. 13k DPS, burst was 30. Like, their burst is 3 times their DPS. It is ridiculous. No other burst came anywhere close on the target dummy, and Ret Paladins just, when you pop your cooldowns, you feel like an absolute god. You feel like you can kill anything, you can solo any raid boss. It's just so good and so fun to play. So Ret Paladins, to me, they're looking really good, and once again, after your burst as well, you do sustain quite relatively nice DPS, and then their burst damage is just absolutely unmatched if you ask me. Now, Prot Paladins are also really good in this expansion, and they deserve a pretty mid to high A-tier spot. Prot Paladins are really good for AoE pulling, they're really good for their defensive cooldowns, and they're really good for, well, yeah, their defensive cooldowns. So it's another tank you can bring to the table. You can have Blood DKs, Prot Paladins, Feral Druids. Once again, the one tank you would probably not bring, or the last one you would bring, would be a Protection Warrior. Now, one final note on Paladins is that all of the different specs go over to being a builder/spender combination now, where you're building up holy power and then spending holy power on most of your abilities. So you're using abilities to build up power, and then you're using those powers on other abilities, either a cooldown or a damage spending ability. So Templar's Verdict, for example, is Retribution, and you have a couple of heals as well. You have Divine Plea giving you max charges, and you have Inquisition or something like that for Retribution Paladins as well, which is a cooldown based on activating those powers. So builder and spender, basically a rogue but as a paladin, if that makes sense. Okay, with that being said, we have the priest as well to take a look at and put into the tier list. That's going to be the next class. So for the priest, let's start off with the discipline priest, and this one is going to go all the way up to the S tier, right next to the holy paladin. And the reasoning for that is that when it comes to choosing healers for your raid, they will always have a raid spot, either a holy paladin or a disc priest, or if you're doing a 25 man, you want to have both, and they can shield damage before it comes in, and they will always be competing for the top of the healer meters based on being able to effectively heal before people take damage by pre-shielding everyone and keeping those shields active for as much as they can. In addition to that, they do provide some raid-wide utility and bonuses as well, but in general, they're just always the class you want to bring. And once again, when it comes to putting a healer to be a hybrid between both healing and DPS, it's usually not the paladin and not the priest, because you want to have those. So with that being said, let's take a look at holy, and for holy I'm putting that all the way down to C tier, based on discipline being so good. You could make some arguments for the holy priest to be higher, but I simply don't see them, and for me, you bring the discipline priest for the shields that they bring, and then you would bring other healers for direct healing. Now, Shadow Priest on the other hand, Shadow Priest you can put in a lot of places. I have seen other, like for example some of the websites we looked at earlier today, they put Shadow Priest in S tier, I've seen them down in B tier. For me, I would place them in the A tier, and I would put them pretty high in the A tier as well. Something like this is something that I can be happy with. Sometimes they do a dip up to the S tier in certain raid, on certain raid bosses, certain fights, and in certain tiers they do perform well, and in certain boss fights they don't perform so well either. So for me, Shadow Priest is going to be the middle of the A tier, and I think that's a pretty good place to put them. Next up we have the Shaman. For this one, let's start with the healer, and when it comes to Shaman healers, I'm gonna put Shaman healers right here in the A tier, and the reasoning why is that a lot of people probably would put them even lower, but Spirit Link is absolutely massive. So for me, Shaman healers go from being, for example, B tier up to A tier thanks to Spirit Link. They also get their healing rain, and they still heal with chain heal, all of the usual stuff. They bring heroism/bloodlust, and they bring their different totems that we had in the past, even though a lot of other classes do bring some of those same bonuses. Now the thing is, if you're playing a Resto Shaman, you really want to have a dual spec, because in 25-man raids, maybe even 10-man raids, if you want to have a guaranteed raid spot, you want to be flexible enough to not always heal. Restoration Shamans are really wanted on certain boss fights, where Spirit Link is absolutely crucial, but then on other boss fights where you need less healing and you don't need Spirit Link, you will probably be the first one to be asked to go to a DPS. It's either going to be you or the Druid, so you going into Elemental, or even Enhancement, but Elemental uses a lot of the same loot and a lot of the same gear as Elemental and Restoration. So you can have dual spec between both Resto and Elemental at the same time. Or you can be a Druid and you can be asked to go Boomkin, so then you have Resto Druid going over to Boomkin as their off spec. So once again, the main thing is, if you're playing Restoration Shaman, make sure to have the off spec ready to go, and don't feel bad if people ask you to go to your off spec. Next up we have the Elemental Shaman. The Elemental Shaman could go pretty much all over the place. I would put Elemental Shamans at the pretty much top of A tier, maybe even S tier. It really depends, but Elemental Shamans are pumping a lot in Cataclysm, and I think for me I would put them something like this. So the absolute top of A tier, while putting in a verbal mention that they do dip up to S tier quite often. So Elemental Shamans high A tier, and quite often in the S tier as well. It's a really good class to pick, a really good spec to pick as well. They're really good, really pumping damage this time, and yeah, Shamans, you don't go wrong with picking Elemental Shaman. One thing to note for the Elemental Shaman is that the mastery you get is basically proccing additional casts of the same cast. So if you're making a lava burst, for example, you can proc another lava burst on the same cast. So you cast 2 lava bursts in one cast, and then when you get to Firelands, for example, the legendary staff does the exact same thing. So you're just copying your casts over and over and over again, which makes them really fun to play. And it's also just you have no cooldown on Chain Lightning. And in general, Shamans are a really fun class to play, they're a really good class to play, and pretty much all the specs are really viable. And touching further on that, I still think Enhancement is also really viable. Enhancement Shamans for me would be B tier, maybe even low A tier, but I would put them in the B tier. And the main reasoning for this for me is that I would put them even high B tier, so all the way up to the top of the B tier. And I will say this, when I was doing DPS on the target dummy, Enhancement Shaman was number 2 on consistent DPS, Feral Druid was number 1, Enhancement Shaman was number 2 on consistent single target DPS, with a little bit of cleave because my Fire Totem hit 2 mobs, or like 2 target dummies, so a little bit of cleave, 20% cleave. That being said, Enhancement Shaman still felt really good. You don't see those big numbers because you don't do one big hit, but you do like 1,000 small hits, and you have so much haste, you have your Wind Fury. Enhancement Shamans does feel quite nice to play. That being said, Elemental is vastly better, so Enhancement is nice, Elemental is better. There we go, that's basically Shamans for you. So with Shamans covered, we only really have 3 more classes to cover. One of them is the class that I intend to main, so let's start with that one now. That's going to be the Warlock. So for me, I really want to play an Affliction Warlock, but I sadly do think, and I think I have to finally say this, Demonology Warlocks are better in pretty much every single scenario. Demonology Warlocks, like I'm going to put them here in the middle of S tier, while verbally saying that a Demonology Warlock playing perfectly and using snapshotting mechanics, they're going to be top DPS. It really depends on the boss fight and the raid tier and when in the Cataclysm expansion this happens, but Demonology Warlocks are just absolute pumpers, both single target and AoE, and that really hurts me because I'm gonna play a Demonology Warlock, but I really prefer the Affliction playstyle. So Affliction goes up in the A tier, and I'm really torn on where in the A tier I want to put Affliction Warlocks, but I'm gonna put them right there. So Affliction Warlocks A tier, quite high / middle of the A tier as well, right next to Shadow Priest. And I will just say once again, Demonology Warlocks are simply better, and for Destruction this one would go all the way down to C tier. And right next to Beast Mastery, Arcane Mages, and the reasoning why is like, why would you play these specs when the other ones exist? Like, why play Destro Warlock when Demonology is so much better? Why play Beast Mastery when Survival is so much better? Why play Arcane when Fire is so much better? And why play Holy when Disc is so much better? To me, that just doesn't make any sense. Okay, so Warlock done. Next up is going to be the Warrior. Warriors are really a mixed bag. I will say you will want to have some gear before you really start shining. I was trying to do some DPS on the target on me, and I will say Warriors wasn't really feeling that bad, but I do know that they scale really well with the gear you get, and the right trinkets, getting some right enchants as well, and the gems you get, like the main stats. Warriors just scale absolutely incredibly, and Arms Warriors are incredible pumpers. I'm not gonna put them over Demonology Warlocks, but I'm gonna put them between Demonology Warlock and Fire Mage. So S tier all the way up here. Arms Warriors, pretty good. Now, for the same reason that I've been doing the other things, Fury Warriors would be down to D tier, and once again, the main reason is why would you play Fury when you have arms, and the actual performance is, like, the difference is just massive. Why would you play the vastly underperforming spec when you don't have to? And I've also been alluding to this previous in the video, that tank warriors, prot warriors, they really are not the class you want to bring. They would be C tier, somewhere in the C tier, doesn't really matter where in the C tier, but it's not going to be like a don't bring this, but if you have the option, and you have Blood DKs in your guild, you have Feral Druid tanks, and you have Prot Paladins, and you have Prot Warriors, if you had to choose one of them to go, it would be the Prot Warrior. That's the one that has to go. Next up we have Rogues, and for Rogues it's a lot of the same. We have like one spec that is performing really well, so Assassination goes all the way up into the A tier. I don't know exactly where in the A tier you would put this. I think I would put it next to Warlocks, so Affliction Warlocks, then Rogues. Now, for the same reason as we talked about in the past, Subtlety Rogues goes down to C tier, because why would you play the underperforming spec when you don't have to? With that being said, we only have one more specialization to rank, and that is going to be the Combat Rogue, which goes right up into B tier. And that is my entire tier list for Cataclysm Classic, based on every class's performance, whether it's a tank, DPS, melee DPS, ranged DPS, and healer. Once again, if you're maining one of these classes and you have a lot of knowledge about it, let me know if I got your class correct or completely wrong in the comments down below as well. Once again, these are just my opinions, my tier list based on my experiences so far. Once again, I played Cataclysm quite a lot back in the day. It was one of the expansions where I played the most, I think. Not on a super hardcore level, but it was like when I first started understanding the game, did PvP, did PvE, heroic raids, started making gold, leveling alt. It was a really fun expansion back in the day, and I'm hoping Classic is gonna be the same. It's gonna be a nostalgia trip, that's for sure. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like down below as well, and once again, check out my Classic Cataclysm Goldmaking Guide through the link down below in the pinned comment or the top of the description, where I promise that I will do my best to help you make as much gold as possible. Alternatively, check out my Patreon as well for more gold making content and early access to videos, including you also get an exclusive video on Patreon every single month. That is one video that I don't upload anywhere else, and for the launch of Cataclysm we have something quite unique. Either way, thank you for watching the video, it really means a lot to me, and I'll see you again in the next one.